Okay, sorry about that, guys. So, hi everyone, welcome to the Wetland Wipeout Workshop. My name is Anya Gupta. I'm a sophomore at Newark Charter High School. So, first of all, how are you guys today? Thank you for giving me responses. So that's good to hear because I know this time of year things can get pretty hectic. You guys know it best. So, just before we start, how many of you have been to Louisiana or New Orleans? Okay, a few of you, random, I know. So, shifting gears, taking the lead on this workshop is Miss Jacqueline Richard, Director of Coastal Studies at. Okay. Miss Jacqueline Richard, Director of Coastal Studies at Nunez Community College in Louisiana. Today, Miss Richard is going to be elaborating on wetlands near New Orleans that are unfortunately vanishing due to rising sea levels. So, this crisis is very much still happening today, even as we speak, but some amazing people have decided to take action. So Ms. Richard is going to be detailing some of those methods of action or restoration, and also will be asking you guys some questions along the way. She's going to be talking about the history of the crisis and coastal restoration project types to alleviate it. There's also going to be like a little quiz at the end, so if you're competitive, go for that. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Ms. Richard.
Thank you. I definitely appreciate that introduction. And it's great to talk to everybody this morning. I know y'all are pretty far away from Louisiana, so it's really great to be able to share some of the things that we're dealing with down here on the Gulf Coast. So as mentioned, I'm Jacqueline Richard. I'm the Director of Coastal Studies and GIS Technology at Nunez Community College. I've been working in the coastal field for about 17 years. I've been educating at the higher education level for that long. So today I'm going to kind of give you a highlight of some of the issues that we're dealing with and some of the why we're dealing with these issues. And if you have any questions along the way, I don't know if there's a way to get microphones around to people, but please feel free to interrupt me. I'm one of those professors that I like to have dialogue. So if you have any questions that pop up, please feel free to interrupt me. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. And as you can see, even on the title slide, you can see how much wetlands Louisiana has lost. So since we've colonized this area, we've lost an immense amount. And unfortunately, that's not slowing down. Oops. So to give you a little bit of an idea of where we are, since I know not everyone's been to Louisiana. So here's Louisiana. New Orleans is right here. Okay, so this is Lake Pontchartrain. We're going to talk a little bit about its history and how it got there. But this is Lake Pontchartrain. The Mississippi River comes down in this direction. You can see that it comes all the way down here, right, and funnels out to the sea. And this type of delta that we have down here is called a bird's foot delta because it has 3 little feet that come out. And so it looks exactly like a bird's foot. I highlighted this other river over here as well, because this is part of the Mississippi River system. This is the Atchafalaya River. Don't worry, I will not test you on the pronunciation of this word. It is quite tricky, but this is the Atchafalaya. The Atchafalaya River is part of the Mississippi River, and you're going to see this history here in a few minutes. But we have another delta down here. It's hard to see, but this is the Wax Lake Delta. The Wax Lake Delta is extremely successful and really about the only thing along our coastline that's currently building land. So I wanted to give you a little bit of history on how we got where we are geologically before we dive into all the problems. So in general, the Mississippi River has been building for 65 million years. So the Mississippi River has built its way literally from the tip of Illinois all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico since the time T-Rex was wandering North America. So sea levels used to be very, very high, and the Mississippi River moved its way down and built all this land. But I really want to highlight the last 7,000 years, because that's when we really start seeing the most dramatic change. So the Mississippi River, you can see about 7,000 years ago. So here's New Orleans. That's this red dot for comparison. The Delta was building way over here, okay, on the western part of the state, nowhere close to New Orleans. Sea level was very, very high at this point. And as we move through time, I want you to notice there's a time clock down here, so you can kind of see where we are in years. As we move through time, you can see this is building the Maroguin Delta. So it's building the central part of our state. And what happens, and I'm going to highlight this on the next few slides, is the Mississippi River and all rivers in general kind of work like a loose water hose, where they kind of go back and forth, right, across the landscape and build land. And so as it moves, right, you can see now it's moving over to the eastern part of the delta, or the eastern part of the state, about 5,500 years ago. This is the Teche Delta. If you really love kayaking, you can come here today and kayak the old Teche Delta. It's like 175 miles. It's really fun. I'd love to do it one day. But as the delta continued to build, it finally moved over to New Orleans and built the St. Bernard Delta. Now, I want to go back in time here real quick, just so you notice that where I highlighted Lake Pontchartrain before, this was all part of the Gulf of Mexico. And it doesn't get closed off to become a lake until, right, the St. Bernard Delta about 3,500 years ago. And the St. Bernard Delta is pretty unique in the sense that when it built out about way out to the east, and it left behind a series of islands today that mark the edge of this delta, and it's called the Chandeleur Islands. And today they're really important for bird migration and bird habitat and turtle habitat as well. But as we continue to build, right, it moved from the St. Bernard Delta and came down to the Lafourche Delta, building the more of the central part of the state. For those of you that pay attention to the news, this was the part of the state that got hit by Hurricane Ida 2 years ago. And then finally, from the Lafourche Delta, it moved over and built the modern Plaquemines or Birdfoot Delta. Now, one thing that I really want you guys to notice is how small the modern Plaquemines or Birdfoot Delta is. Even if we just go back one step, you can see how big and beautiful these deltas were. And as we move towards today, it's very restricted, and it's not really growing like that normally does. And this is going to be because of human intervention, right? We're not really letting the delta do what it wants to do. And that's one of the issues we're going to talk about. So just to give you an idea of what it looks like on the ground level. So as a delta builds, right, the Mississippi River brings down, to me, this is always an impressive number, 550 million tons of sediment every single year to the Gulf of Mexico. 330 tons goes down the Mississippi River, and 220 million tons, goes down the Atchafalaya. So there's an incredible amount of sediment. So what happens is as that river hits the Gulf of Mexico, the river is moving fast. The Gulf of Mexico is not moving very fast. It's like hitting a brick wall, and all that sediment drops out and builds this delta, right, as you can see. So it'll just continue to build out until, right, you can see that it builds out pretty far. But notice the water is going to have to travel a long way to go past this arrow over here, where it can just kind of shortcut, right, over in this direction. And what we usually see is this is what happens in the springtime when we let the river do what it wants to do, meaning where we don't have human levees or interventions along the river. So what would naturally happen is in the springtime, when all the snow melts up north, we don't get snow here in Louisiana very often. So when all the snow melts from up north, because the Mississippi River drains 33 states, water levels go up really high in the Mississippi River. And what can happen is we can get what's called a crevasse. We're in Louisiana, so we have to use our French words. So crevasse just means a cut through the levee. And so what'll happen is you'll start to get this new distributary, essentially, right, that forms. But if you notice, this is a much quicker route to the Gulf of Mexico than going all the way down this big arrow. And so what'll happen over time is this distributary will get bigger and bigger and bigger until it eventually short circuits this bottom part of the delta, and we get a new delta that builds. Okay. It's a really interesting process. And this is a process that has happened naturally since the dawn of time until about 100 years ago, when we stopped letting the river move around. So, as Anya mentioned, Louisiana is definitely in crisis. Since 1932, so not even quite 100 years, Louisiana has lost over 2,000 square miles of land. That is an incredible amount of land. So to put that in perspective, to give you the statistic, we lose a football field of land every 100 minutes in Louisiana. And that's 24 hours a day, right? That doesn't stop at 5 o'clock when we all go home from work and school. That continues every day, all day. And so much so that, so this map here on the bottom, this is an area way down, let me move this here. This is an area that's located over here on the Mississippi River. This is what it used to look like here on the right. All these areas in yellow were all marsh, right? So areas that are temporary or permanently have water in them. Since sea level rise and the degradation of our wetlands has occurred, we've had to take 31 names off of the nautical charts because they just don't exist anymore. What used to be land is now all open water. And so we definitely have some issues. So when did it all start? When did it all go wrong? Well, it's a pretty interesting story, and I hope you're going to stick with me for a little bit of this story. But in the 1830s, so a very long time ago, we used steamboats, right, to go up and down the river. And Captain Shreve was a very famous boat captain. He has a whole city named after him in Louisiana. And he would work this middle section of the Mississippi River in Louisiana, and he'd have to take his steamboat all the way around this big bend. And, you know, when you're going all the way around this big bend and you realize you only really need to go from point A here to point B, you know, it takes several hours, takes about 8 hours to go all the way around this loop. And it was kind of the bane of Captain Shreve's existence. So he decided to take matters into his own hands. And he came out and dredged, which dredge means, right, to basically use a marsh buggy or some equipment to dig a big hole. And he dredged a new cut into the river to make a shortcut, going from point A to point B, no problem, right? So he didn't have to spend 8 hours going all the way around. It was much quicker for him. But unfortunately, that caused mass amounts of degradation in the area. So one thing I want you to know, because I'm going to show you here, I'm going to kind of go back and forth for a second. Here, the Mississippi River comes around this big bend. The Red River drains into the Mississippi River, and the Atchafalaya, that's one of the main distributaries of the Mississippi River, comes off here at the bottom. Well, after Shreve made his famous shortcut, I want you to notice that the Red River now does not go into the Mississippi River anymore. It drains into the Atchafalaya. There's also another reason why this occurred. So the Mississippi River is an incredibly dynamic system, right? As I mentioned, 550 million tons of sediment comes down every year. Well, it's not just sediment that comes down, it's huge log jams that come down as well. This is a really was a really famous log jam. This is called the Red River Raft. This log jam here, there's a little guy here for scale. This picture was taken right before it was removed in the 1830s. So you can kind of get some scale here. But this raft of logs existed for 800 years because there's Native American records of this log raft. And it's 175 miles long. So as the springtime floods come up, right, lots of trees got ripped out and came down into the Mississippi, which actually really helped the river kind of slow down the water movement, and sediment wouldn't get deposited. And this was a really, really great place for a long time. But right, that Red River raft came up the Red River here and got stuck in the Mississippi River over here. So Shreve had to deal with two issues, right? He had to cut his shortcut, and he decided he wanted to get rid of this gigantic log jam that was in the way. Well, when he did this, okay, when Shreve got rid of this, he used two methods to get rid of this log jam. He used excavators, right, to help kind of move that material away, but to break up that initial log jam, as a lot of people in the 1830s did, he used dynamite. You're going to see in some of these pictures, Louisiana has a little bit of a dynamite problem. But when he blew up this Red River raft, it temporarily made, well, not temporarily, it permanently made that part of the Red River and where the Red River and the Atchafalaya meet deeper than the Mississippi River. So what that meant was the water was no longer going to want to come down the Mississippi River. It was going to want to funnel over here, right, to the Atchafalaya, go down the Red River and the Atchafalaya instead of the Mississippi River. And so that was really kind of the start of when we started really messing up the Mississippi River down here. And today we have a huge river control structure. You can see this straight line that runs across from river to river. Anytime you see a straight line on a map, that's definitely human made, right? Nature doesn't work in straight lines. So we today have to have this huge complex that keeps 60% of the river flowing down the Mississippi, and it funnels 40% of it over to the Atchafalaya. Without this control system, 100% of the water would be coming down the Atchafalaya instead of the Mississippi. Around the same time, we really started using this area up for all of its resources, as humans generally tend to do, unfortunately. Fur trappers were in this area. They really hunted a lot of the muskrats that were in this region and really hunted them pretty much into non-existence in Louisiana anymore. They're still around, but not nearly in the numbers that they used to be. After muskrats were hunted out, we really came in and started logging the cypress, taking these really big old growth cypress trees that were, several hundred years old out of our swamps, because cypress has natural waterproof abilities. So people wanted to build their homes and their floorboards with it. So when the river would come up in the summer and springtime, right, their house would essentially be waterproof. Plus cypress is really pretty. But first I want you to notice, right, the size of these. I still think that's impressive. But today we can still see the scars of the logging system. So here in this lower picture, you kind of see these radial canals that come out of a region. So what they used to do is they would come in here and literally just buzz cut all of these cypress, put them into the water and have boats drag them through, because these are big, heavy, heavy trees. And so these were just drag canals, right? Dragging these cypress out and into normal and into one central location. And so these scars of 100 years later are still present on our planet. And you can see them from space. And of course, these trees are really important because, tree roots go down into the ground and they help hold the soil together. And so by not having any trees, that just increases erosion, right, as water and storms and springtime floods come in. Then as the industry started to ramp up, ships kind of got a little bit tired of going straight up the Mississippi River. Well, because it's not very straight, it's very windy. So we cut a straight canal to go from the Gulf of Mexico to the Mississippi, or to go up into the Mississippi system. And this is what we affectionately call the Mr. Go, the Mississippi River Gulf Outlet. And here you can see all these gentlemen blowing up this beautiful cypress forest back here to make this canal. I really love the juxtaposition of this photo. You have all these gentlemen in uniform and in business suits blowing up this forest that's probably, several thousand years old for our convenience. Of course, all this did was increase oil and gas production in the region as well. As soon as oil and gas was found in the Gulf of Mexico, it was pretty much on after that. And today we have dug over 10,000 miles of pipeline canal into our marshes. So what used to be nice, beautiful, continuous marsh, this is what it looks like today. So you can see how it's just been carved up. And when you carve up a marsh, what happens is this acts like a highway for salt water. So when storms come in, they push an amazing amount of water in front of them. And that's what we call storm surge. And that storm surge can just go up these canals like a highway because they're nice and straight line. And that just causes these marshes that might only be adapted for fresh water or brackish water to die and fall apart because they can't handle that saltwater inundation. And really the biggest turning point in the Mississippi River was in 1927. So about 100 years ago, there was a huge flood in the Ohio River Valley. And I do want to tell you this story here just a little bit quickly, because I think it's really important to understand some of the human interactions here with the river that we have. So there was a large flooding event that happened in the Ohio River Valley. All of that water and sediment comes down here to the Gulf of Mexico through the Mississippi. And as we saw this water approaching, because it takes 90 days, right, for water in Minnesota to reach its way to the Gulf. So as we saw this water approaching, the people in New Orleans got very nervous about their businesses and their big expensive homes. And they wanted to make sure that this area wasn't going to get flooded. So what they did is they put a petition together to bust one of the levees on the poorer section of town to let the water go flood the poor section of town so it wouldn't destroy businesses in the rich end of town. There was a bunch of engineers saying it wasn't needed because the way the water was moving down, they knew the levee was going to bust somewhere else. But of course, the business owner said, no, we want to have this, this levee blown up over here. So they went ahead and blew up the levee. You can see right here, this is an actual picture from when they blew it up in 1927. And this huge wall of water, as you can see, funneled through that cut in the levee and filled this poor, very, very poor area of town. This is the same area, coincidentally, that was flooded during Katrina. So this is it's very unfortunate that our poorer sections of town were not built to great standards and generally end up getting flooded out pretty frequently. But the crazy part about this, I just want to highlight this juxtaposition, is there was a lot of people, you could see here, a lot of reporters taking pictures of this event, and there was a lot of rich people in boats and in airplanes. There's records of people in airplanes watching this explosion happen, while there were the poor side of town were literally filling up their wagons, horse-drawn wagons full of all of their goods to get out of town. So it's just a really kind of intense juxtaposition. Well, when this happened, basically the people down here said, okay, we can't ever let this happen again. And the federal government at that point then decided to make federal levees along the river. And so today the Mississippi River is levied up from the very tip of Illinois all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. And so now we've straitjacketed the river, and we don't allow the river to move back and forth like it's supposed to. We've also introduced an amazing amount of invasive species in Louisiana that, of course, outcompete all of our native species. Our biggest ones, our biggest offenders, even though this cute little face over here is adorable, this is the nutria. It was introduced into Louisiana after the muskrat population declined from over-trapping. We introduced the nutria from South America so that way fur trappers would have something to go hunt. And now we have a big problem because they eat all the vegetation around. So lots of issues with invasive species. Of course, hurricanes do not help our situation in Louisiana at all. These are some before and afters. This is a before and after on the left here from Katrina. I want you to notice that these were taken about a month apart from each other. So this is pre-Katrina. The green highlights dry land, meaning, you know, the greener it is, the less water there is in the area. So you can see some of these areas that are a little bit lighter green. These might be some of our marshes. And then after Katrina hit, you can see how much of this land was then inundated with water and washed away. So we lost a significant portion of our land from this hurricane. And this is really when it was kind of a turning point in Louisiana when we realized we got to start doing something. This is after Ida in 2021. And you can even see here in this bottom picture, you know, this is our before picture, and here is our after Ida. We lost an immense amount of marsh due to these hurricanes. And of course, the more marsh we lose, you know, the less protection we have from sea level rise and storms as they come in. And speaking of sea level rise, this is probably our biggest offender right now. And it is predicted by 2050, most of the coastline of Louisiana is going to experience 18 to 24 inches of sea level rise. And that is an incredible amount of water that's coming in just 22 years from now, not very long. So these areas that are shaded in light blue, these are areas that were all dryish land today that are now disappearing. They're now going to go away in the next 22 years. I tell my students when I teach them in my classroom that I teach environmental science, and I tell them, you know, if you come back in 20 years, this area is going to be underwater. Your classroom's not going to be here anymore. So we have these significant issues. So after Katrina, there was a group that was formed called the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority. And it is a state agency that works with federal partners to help rebuild our coastline and restore our marshes. So every 5 years, they come up with a master plan. We're the only state in the country that has a master plan for coastal restoration to deal with our wetland loss and sea level rise at the same time. So you can see here, this is our prediction for the next, 50 years. As you can see, what's highlighted in light blue, which light blue is generally a nice color. This is the land that we're going to be losing. So you can see that, by 2050 or even further, by 2080, we're really going to be losing an immense amount of land. So CPRA puts together a huge host of projects to help restore our coastline. This master plan that we have is a $50 billion project, which the federal government doesn't really give us any money towards this. So we get to do all the fundraising. Fortunately, we don't sell cookies, right, to get all $50 billion. The one horrible saving grace is when the BP oil spill happened, all those fines got funneled into coastal restoration. And so even though the BP oil spill was a horrible event, and we're still dealing with the after effects of it, all that fine money is helping fund all of these coastal restoration projects. And so we're going to get into these now and kind of talk about these different types of coastal restoration projects And then after we go through them, I'm going to see if you guys can suggest some coastal restoration projects given some maps. So let's learn about what some of these different projects are. So one way that we combat coastal restoration is we can have these things called diversions. And what a diversion does is it takes down the levee in a part of the Mississippi River to connect the Mississippi River back up to its marshes, and which is the healthy way, right? The nice, normal way the river works. And there's two different types of diversions. The first is called a freshwater diversion. So the Mississippi River is obviously freshwater, right? A lot of our marshes around Louisiana range from freshwater to intermediate, meaning it's a little bit of, a lot of fresh, a little bit of salt, to brackish, where it's more on the salty side, all the way to saline, right? Our salt marshes. And so what a freshwater diversion does is it brings in more water than sediment into an area to help convert a marsh into a freshwater marsh. And so I have a really good example of this. This is called the Carnarvon diversion. So back before maybe a lot of you were born, which makes me feel very old, but back here in 1998, you can see this nice big open water area here. This was an area, this is actually consequently the same area that was, the levee was blown up in 1927. It literally happened right here. So this area is picked on a lot. But this area was a crawfish pond. So it was an area covered in a little bit of water that we would fish crawfish out of. And then the people that owned this land wanted to convert it into a garden, right? Basically where we grow tomatoes and lettuce to get shipped all around the world. Well, the land just degraded over time and turned into this big open water area. So a diversion was built to funnel more of this fresh water into this area to help these wetlands that are surrounding it grow and get bigger. And here you can see by 2015, this area that was once open water is now nicely filled in with beautiful marsh. I drive over it every day to work and love seeing the alligators and the herons loving their life in the Carnarvon diversion. Another type is a sediment diversion, and this is actually something we haven't really done to its full capacity yet, but we are in the process of doing. So a sediment diversion minimizes the amount of water coming off the Mississippi River, but maximizes the amount of sediment. And that's important because when you put a lot of sediment into the marsh, that's what helps rebuild the land, right? To allow more vegetation to grow. And so we are currently this year starting on the Mid-Barataria sediment diversion, which is going to be the largest coastal restoration project in the entire world when it gets started. But this is going to connect up. We're going to cut a hole in the Mississippi River so you can kind of see what this looks like. So there's going to be this hole here in the Mississippi River, and it's going to funnel sediment down this chute and go out into the marsh. And it's supposed to rebuild about 50 square miles of marsh in this extremely vulnerable area. And there are plans to do more diversions. You can see this Mid-Breton diversion, and then there's a couple other diversions all along the river that are proposed to come online as well. Another type of restoration method we can use is a hydrologic restoration. So that the word hydro should already clue you into this is freshwater or water in general. So what this is going to do, a hydrologic restoration is different than a freshwater diversion because these can be turned on and off very specifically to help push away salt water when it comes in. So sometimes in the winter or even in the summer, we get these really hard south winds that can push salt water up into these marshes and degrade them. So when we open up some of these structures, like you can see here, we can really push fresh water out to help push that salt water away. So it'll kind of help that freshwater marsh stay a freshwater marsh instead of degrading during an event. Now, this is my personal favorite type of restoration because I am that big of a nerd to have a favorite type of restoration, but this is marsh creation. And marsh creation is basically using physics to help rebuild the marsh. So this is an area that I actually actively work in, and I apologize, these dates kind of got all mixed up on my slide here. This picture here on the left, this was an open water area. This was originally a nice healthy salt marsh that got degraded during a storm event, and it fell apart. And there was a natural crevasse that cut in the levee that opened up from the Mississippi River. And so we decided to just let that area convert itself into a freshwater marsh, but we wanted to help it. So we built these things called a terrace. So these little kind of strips of land, these dots out here, these dashes, these are terraces that act like a speed bump. So when you go over a speed bump in your car, you generally slow down. And that's what happens here. So as the water comes up in the spring and goes over these bumps, it slows down and allows for sediment to get deposited. And today, right, this is from 2018, and I can tell you, I actually just did a whole bunch of filming out here for another project. It looks even better today, especially in the spring, but you can see how much land now has been created. You can't even really see that open water area anymore. So it's like, it's just really fantastic. There's tons and tons of birds that love this area. Another project to show you here, I just want to mention it. This is the Lake Bourne project. This is currently the largest coastal restoration project that's happening in our country. And it's happening here in Louisiana. And it's, again, doing something very similar, turning this large freshwater open area into a little bit more infilled, slowing down the Mississippi River water to allow sediment to happen. We can also have what's called a ridge restoration. So a ridge restoration is just kind of restoring the natural high spots that occur down in the Delta. So this is a bayou. This bayou used to be the old Mississippi River back when the St. Bernard Delta was building. But in any event, this is an old channel, and the sides of the channel of the river are always a little bit higher. So here you can see what we're doing is we're using equipment to restore that high edge of this bayou that used to be here. So we're creating a ridge. And usually on our ridges, we get lots of big, beautiful trees that grow that, again, help hold that land in place. Then we can also do barrier island and headland restorations. So this is another project that I've worked on personally. This is the Caminada headland restoration. This is a barrier island in Louisiana. So it's not attached to Louisiana, it's right off the coastline. And you can see here on this left picture, this area was degraded. The beach is not very wide. And we came out and we pumped a lot of sand out here. We put beach fence up, which looks like snow fence, and it helps capture sediment, and it's getting blown through the air. And it really helped rebuild this marsh, or this beach, excuse me. I helped lay out, I think we laid out 5 miles of dune fence. I helped with that part of the project. But you can see today, right, this beach looks much better. And then it protects all of these valuable wetlands behind it, which allows them to regrow and get restored. And then finally, we have what's called an oyster reef restoration site. So oysters down here are very prolific and very tasty, but oyster reefs are very important because they protect the land behind them. When waves come in from storms, they'll crash into these reefs, and that wave energy will then get broken up instead of eroding the land behind it. Well, because of sea level rise and all these storms, a lot of our oyster reefs have gotten destroyed. So we're now helping these oysters restore their reefs and help putting them in new places. So one thing that we do is we gather oysters from New Orleans, from all the restaurants, and put them in these vulnerable places. So this is a place called the Lemon Tree Site. This is a Native American mound. Native Americans lived in the Delta since the beginning of time, right? Since the beginning of human existence on our continent. And unfortunately, a lot of these Native American sites are now today washing away because they're out in the Gulf of Mexico. And so here you can see, this is what this looked like. This is back in like 2015. And this is what it looked like after Ida. This is the same area. So you can see this tree on the edge over here got washed in and is now underwater. And so we realized we had to do something to help protect this Native American site. The Native American tribe lives very close to this location still today. So obviously it's very, very important. This location dates back to 1100 BC. So we know people have been occupying this region since then. So one thing we do is I work with the Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana, and they collect oyster shells from our restaurants in New Orleans, and we bag them up and we put them around. You can see this is the Lemon Tree Site in the background. We put them around this area. The water is the right salinity for oysters to grow. And so new oysters will attach themselves to these bag of old oysters because they need to use the calcium that's in the oyster to grow. and you'll get this big, beautiful new reef that will start to grow. And so again, when waves come and crash in, they're going to crash into this oyster reef instead of the land behind it. And we took this one step further. I brought some students out and we gathered mangrove seeds. So these are baby mangroves. And we seeded this whole ground here with mangroves to, again, help protect that land behind it. So hopefully you guys are in quiz mode now. I know I've only got a few minutes left here, but I do want to do a quick little quiz. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here for a second so I can open up to the quiz.
Okay, yeah. So if you guys have like a phone on you or anything, if you want to participate, you can.
If not, that's okay too. Let me go ahead and start this so that way you can get your code up.
We have like 4 to 5 minutes, so we might not be able to get through all of them, but a couple would be good.
Yeah, I figured a couple would be okay. And Anya, I don't know if there's a way to share that Land Loss Lookout website with anybody interested, but please feel free to.
Yes, okay, thank you. In the meantime, while you guys are joining up, do you have any questions or anything? Comments? Let us continue. Right.
So while you guys are popping in, I like hearing all these little pops. I will say that I do bring students out into the wetlands all the time. Since I've been teaching for about 17 years, we've planted over 80,000 trees in the state of Louisiana with students. So it's a pretty fantastic thing. 80,000 trees is a lot of trees. All right. I know we've got 17 people in. Is everybody in that wants to be in?
All right, I think we should start now just so we can get a couple in. Thank you.
All right, no problem. So I've got just a couple of things. I've got this set up as a poll for you. Oh, you can't really see that picture too well. All right. So this is an area, right? If we want to make a wetland buffer, what am I going to want to do here? So here, this is the river coming down. This is a big lake that's up here draining out to the Gulf of Mexico. Oh, I love this poll. This is great. Got 10 more seconds to make a thought. Here we go. It's taking the lead. Good. We're about evenly split between marsh creation and oyster reef restoration. For this area, this would definitely be a marsh creation area. For oyster reef, we will want to stick way out here. So both of you guys are actually right if you chose either one of those, because we could probably deploy both of those things. So now let's see if we can take a look at this area to see what kind of restoration method. Let's see if we can see a better picture here. Maybe you can see that picture a little bit better.
Yeah, I think that's the participants' view. So I think
yeah, that helps a little bit. I know y'all can see it on your phones too.
Mm-hmm.
This was my favorite type, if you remember. 2 seconds. Good. Some of y'all chose marsh creation. That's exactly what that was. That was a terrace field. And we can end with this one, if that works.
Yeah, I think people are starting to filter out because it's time for the next workshop. But
okay.
Thank you so much for sharing your, insightful information and professional knowledge on this topic today, and obviously the process throughout. And I think everyone, me included, learned something new. So thank you I don't know where I'm supposed to look. Right there.
There you go.
Yeah, but thank you.
You're welcome. Have a great afternoon and enjoy the rest of your summit.
Thank you so much. You too.
Thanks. Bye-bye.